America's politicians seem to be a little bit scared, and today I'm going to be looking at their preparations for a mass casualty event. And I'm going to misspeak when I say that because I keep on saying it wrong for whatever reason. And there's lots of interesting things about this, and I'm going to discuss lots of the implications of this because I actually think it's a very interesting and important topic, as well as the fact that there are lots of things about the discussion around it and the reporting and who's involved in it that I find interesting. And I'd be very interested to see what you guys make of it, because it sort of gets my spidey senses tingling, my political spidey senses, that is. And I feel like there's something going on here. There's something more to it than what it's presented as. But first, Islander. It is the best magazine ever to exist. Particularly the last piece in it is very good, and that's not because I did it. But it's only for sale for a short amount of time. You'll want to read it. You'll be kicking yourself. The government can never censor this. It can take down our website. It can take down our videos. It will never take that magazine away from you. So if you want something permanent, you want something that is lasting, you want something that is beautiful, get this magazine. But with that out the way, I have noticed these articles in recent weeks. So here is the Washington Post. Scarred by violence, lawmakers plan for possible mass casualty event. And the byline is, Congress must ensure it can continue to govern in the aftermath of mass violence, a bipartisan group of the House members argues.
What violence are they referring to? Is this January 6th?
No, as in they're anticipating there to be violence. They're expecting there to be future political violence and potential mass casualty events of lawmakers.
Just vaguely.
Vaguely.
But it says scarred, not scared. So that would imply in the headline, I know it's Washington Post, so the standards are low, that something has already happened, hence why they're expecting another thing to happen.
So I will be coming back to this article because it's not as unprecedented. It does validate that with some of the direct quotes of the people involved in the push for this constitutional change. And I'll be coming back to that once I actually explain a little bit more about it. But Politico also picked up on this as well with a very long article. I'm not going to read any of it because I want you to have brain cells left. But it goes on and on and on, lots of pictures. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into this. And another left-wing outlet as well, one that I tend not to read very much, is Newser as well. So all of these three outlets have written articles within a couple of days of each other. And that always makes me think, something's going on here. And particularly because the constitutional amendment that we're talking about, the one that wants to, well, we'll talk about the details in a second, but basically prepare for a mass casualty event of members of Congress, was in the works from March. So here's Derek Kilmer, who's one of the people sort of proposing this bill. This is the 7th of March.
Is he a Democrat or a Republican?
I believe this guy is a Democrat. It's a bipartisan thing, by the way. So there's two Dems and two Republicans associated with it, who we'll talk about in a second. And also another person, this is another Democrat. This is on his website, but the key thing is the date here, 7th of March again. And here is bill track, 7th of March. It's introduced and is now in the committee stage. So you'd think, well, why is this being discussed now all of a sudden in September when this is something that happened back in March? Because that seems unusual, doesn't it? Could it be the lead up to the election, perhaps? Well, it could also be this, that the committee has heard about it and is making a big deal about it. So this is, if you're listening, it's testimony before the Subcommittee on Modernisation, Committee on House Administration and the House of Representatives. That last one being the most relevant because, of course, the House of Representatives is where all the people proposing the bill are members, and so it makes sense that they're proposing a bill to talk about, well, what happens if we're all killed? We need to keep the function of government going, basically. And I'm going to talk a little bit about who's proposing it. So from the Democrat side, it's Representative Derek Kilmer, who is a representative for Washington, and just a little bit of tidbit for who he is. He's ranked among the most bipartisan members of Congress, so he's least likely to vote with, you know, the fringe wings of the party.
he is generally accepted as someone you do work with.
Yeah, seemingly so. He's the most willing in the Democratic Party, or one of the most willing to work with the other side, which I think is quite a symbolic thing for a bipartisan bill. Then you've got Emmanuel Cleaver II, who is a Democrat for Missouri. I'm probably mispronouncing it because everyone always calls me out on it, but that's how I pronounce it as an English person, all right? And he belongs to the Congressional Progressive Caucus, so he's from the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And on the Republican side, you have Brad Wenstrup, who is from Ohio, and William Timmons from South Carolina, both of which have publicly defended Trump, but are just sort of your run-of-the-mill Republican conservatives. Not really particularly of note. But it is worth mentioning that both Kilmer and Wenstrup are actually retiring at the end of the year. And if we can go back to this first article... Oh, gone too far. Here we are. This Washington Post one, they actually have quotes from them talking about their reason for trying to push for this constitutional amendment, which we're going to go into in great detail. I've got the words there that we can read directly. So he says, it should be somewhere in the body of the text. I've just pulled it out. But Derek Kilmer says, we've seen a 300% increase in threats against members over the last 7 years, according to the Capitol Police. In an environment where we have seen growing tendency towards political violence, imagine, horrifically, a baseball practice where someone has bad intentions and better aim. And of course, this is a reference to the 2017 baseball attack, isn't it?
I was going to ask, actually, whether or not Steve Scalise is in support of this, given he was the congressman that was shot at the congressional baseball game. Yeah.
I've not seen much pushback against this, to be fair, although it hasn't been introduced into the House yet, and so there's not really been much publicity of the pushback. People might privately have objections to it, but we just don't know yet. But he continues to say you can literally flip a majority for 3 or 4 months, which I think is a frightening incentive for political violence. Now, I actually think that this is quite a good argument. He might be a Democrat, sure, but that is a good point, that if a shooter were to take out a significant portion of Congress, it could flip the balance, and those 3 to 4 months could be seen as a justification to someone who is willing to do that, to push things in whichever side they're from. And so that does actually seem like a legitimate reason, but it is interesting that this is being considered now of all times, because it's a pretty formal acknowledgement that political violence is now a very, very serious problem in America.
Well, the grilling of Kim Cheadle after the first Trump assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, was broadly bipartisan. It did have representatives like Ayanna Pressley and Jasmine Crockett trying to insist that DEI is a good thing, and actually that more Democrat lawmakers are having their lives put at risk as Republicans say that certain people are DEI hires. But AOC even had some solid contributions, because I think she realised, as did many other Democrats, that if Trump is in the crosshairs, as Biden urged people to put him in there, that they are next on the list. It's just a matter of ranked priorities. And they are on the list from people who would retaliate if their Republican counterparts were to be shot, and that neither of them want to particularly put their lives on the line, so they may want to defend people of all political stripes, even though they still do the rhetoric which puts Trump's life in danger.
There's common interest here, because basically they suffer from the same danger. And they can do something about it together. And yeah, it sounds plausible.
Yeah, I do think so. Although, once we read the thing, I have lots of questions that we can sort of break down. What could possible ulterior motives be and things like that as well. Because there's a little bit of devil in the detail there. Let's just say that. Always, yes. So, Representative Brad Wenstrup was talking about the 2017 baseball attack. I can't get my words out today. A violent domestic terrorist attempt to assassinate Republican members of Congress. And this is the guy who actually treated Steve Scalise at the event itself. And so he's got a very specific reason to have a sort of bone to pick with this sort of thing. He had names in his pocket, descriptions in his pocket. This was a clear assassination attempt, and he decided to use murder or assassination as a tool for political change. He wanted to wipe out the Republican majority and change the balance of power. I would contend that's an insurrection by one person. Interesting use of words there, isn't it? So it is also worth mentioning as well, the Republicans involved in this bill have defended Trump and the legal challenges brought against him, saying that they're farcical and politically motivated. So that is also worth bearing in mind. So it's not necessarily that he's using that word to side exclusively with the Democrats here.
To be fair, I don't think they have much of a choice here. None of them. Mm-hmm. They don't have a choice on the matter, because if anything happens either way, it's gonna escalate.
I have my suspicions. I'll put it this way: we are approaching the time of an October surprise, and things are not necessarily looking good for the Harris camp. Even though I do think there's still a significant cohort of morons out there that could put her in the White House over Trump. Given how the mayor of DC and Nancy Pelosi stood down the National Guard ahead of January 6th, and then they used January 6th as the pretext to lock up anyone being given a guided tour of the Capitol by the police as a political prisoner, I wouldn't be shocked if this is just the legislation that the current administration can use in the interim period before either Harris or Trump are inaugurated to further clamp down on the Republicans and their supporters following some inexplicable event. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be fair, and I don't think it's too conspiratorial to say, there are still questions around Thomas Crooks and Ryan Routh, how they got Trump's schedule, how they got so close to the venues. It's not impossible that there were, as Crooks' phone records show, some sort of intelligence agency involvement. So it's also not impossible that an event could happen between now and the election or after the election, and then pieces of legislation like this could say, well, this put Congress at risk, therefore we need to take these emergency measures as part of the Constitution to crack down on this. And one final thing as well. A little while ago, end of last month, there was a New York Times op-ed that said the Constitution is dangerous. And the main point of that article was that there has not been a new amendment introduced for 50 years. And this is getting in the way of rolling out all of these entitlements given to clientele groups in the name of rights. The fact that it's a new amendment rather than a bill makes me feel a bit uncomfortable.
Yes, I get that same impression as well.
Yeah, but no, I want to go back to something you said about the questions about the two would-be assassins. That obviously there are questions, because especially when it comes to Trump's second attempt at his life when he was in his golf course, a lot of people have said that this was a spontaneously organized golf game. So how did he get the information to be there? So obviously,
I think he is known for playing on his own golf courses, and maybe he was just there at the right time. It is possible.
Yeah, it's possible. All of that's probabilities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
all of that's probabilities. But I really don't think that, even if that is the case, and there is something inside that coordinates things, if that's the case, I really don't think that everyone in Congress and everyone in the House of Representatives would just know of it.
I'm not saying
because it's I'm not saying you are. I'm introducing another angle into the conversation, because it's also their lives that are at risk.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are playing dangerous games, they are using a lot of these politicians also as
bait.
To sort of respond to what you were saying just a second ago, I think from the evidence that I've looked at so far, the most likely thing is that things like the intelligence agencies that are responsible for Trump's security detail are just complacent, and they're dragging their feet about giving him the right resources because he's been critical of them, and they are sort of dispassionate, to put it lightly, about having to protect him at all. Because
I would agree, but given that certain members of Congress investigating it haven't ruled out the possibility of a mole, it makes me concerned that between now and then there is the perverse incentive, either through complacency or active coordination, to have some kind of event that would manufacture consent for Congress under a new article of the Constitution to cede to themselves more censorious powers.
I can certainly see it being a very likely thing. So anyway, let's get on to the body of this proposal. So, Section 1. Immediately after taking the oath of office, an individual who is elected to serve as a representative of the House of Representatives shall provide the House of Representatives with a list of at least 5 designees to take the individual's place in the event the individual dies prior to the expiration of the individual's term of office. The individual shall ensure that the list only contains the names of designees who meet the qualifications for service as a representative in the House of Representatives.
Is that going to be made public around the time of them campaigning? Is that going to be listed on the ballot paper underneath them? Is it going to be like John Fetterman's case, where when he had his stroke, people thought his wife was just going to take over, or like Biden, who was absent at the recent cabinet?
So this brings up one of my questions about it already. So how would temporarily filling vacant seats with these chosen people by the members themselves affect the democratic legitimacy of the House in the first place, right? Considering that these replacements aren't directly elected by the people, unlike all the other representatives, does that not further denigrate the legitimacy of the democratic process, which may well actually be the motivating factor for some people to engage in these mass casualty events in the first place? Is that not unintentionally making the problem worse by making Congress less democratic than it was before in the first place?
Well, it's like the idea, essentially, that JFK was shot to get Lyndon Johnson in because he complied more with what the powers that be wanted to do in terms of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
The other alternative question that I would have is, if someone is on that list of 5 replacements and gets selected, during the months that they're serving as the congressional replacement in the House or Senate, can they also run to be the replacement while they're serving? So is there not, if that's the case, is there not the incentive to have the person who has listed you killed in a mass casualty event, you then get put in for 2 or 3 months, and you say, well, I've been put in for 2 or 3 months now, so I may as well run to be the representative full time and get ahead that way?
It seems like it, yeah. So I'm going to read section 2 and 3 together and then ask some of the questions because I'm running out of time slowly. So in the event of the death of a representative, the chief executive of the state involved shall, not later than 10 days after the date of death of the representative, select an individual from the most recent list of designees provided by the representative whose seat is now vacant as provided by Section 1, and the Speaker of the House shall immediately fill the vacancy with the individual selected. An individual designated to take the place of a representative shall serve until another member is elected to fill the vacancy, pursuant to a special election. Then Section 3 says, during the period of an individual's service under Section 2, the individual shall be treated as a representative in the House of Representatives for the purpose of all laws, rules and regulations, including for purposes of Section 1. In the event of the death of an individual designated under Section 2, the chief executive of the state involved shall select an individual from the most recent list of designees provided by the individual designated under Section 2 as provided by Section 1. Yes, lots of bureaucratic language here. And the Speaker of the House shall immediately fill the vacancy with the individual selected. So one of the questions here is how do they pick, because they're selecting 5 candidates, how and why are they going to pick the person that they pick? Surely they would want to pick the most qualified, but surely then you're empowering a specific person a lot more than otherwise. And if they don't like, say, the person who's currently assuming that office, is there not an incentive for them to take the mass casualty event in their own hands and replace a large swathe of the Congress, or at least what they are able to do within their state?
Especially if there is someone on the waiting list who might fulfill a certain quota, and if you're a delusional progressive who thinks that there should be by fiat a certain number more diverse congressmen, or even ones of a particular religion, and you think, I could bump off this congressman and get my guy in, there would also be the incentive to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not good.
I also think it's very ambitious to have this 10 days for someone to be replaced, because in a special election the average is 136 days, and there are states that can do it much quicker than that. So the discrepancy there is actually quite small, and although I see what the at least stated justification is, you could just focus on speeding up the special election and avoid a lot of these criticisms that you could make of it being undemocratic and potentially introducing perverse incentives to kill off representatives that are not seen as serving interests of whichever person might be doing it. What do you think, Stelios?
No, I'm covered. Don't have something to add to this.
Okay. And also, it's worth mentioning, is it really that different to the clause in the 17th Amendment that allows governors to appoint temporary Senate replacements? Of course, this is for the House. until special elections are held, because that's done in the Senate, and that, of course, is already an amendment. Why does it have to be its own thing and its own amendment? And is it potentially going to have other things inserted in it that provide undue power as well? We don't know, but it's one thing that I've noticed and I read about, and the fact that lots of left-wing outlets all of a sudden started talking about it and pushing it, that I found interesting. It seems to me to be signalling some sort of shift in the way politics operates. What that actually means, I suppose we'll have to see. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can watch us have a lot of fun in our series Lads Hour on the website. This time we're talking about GeoGuessr, and if you want to follow all the other work we're putting out, you can follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.